Welcome back to the Hot Rod Shop for another episode on our 49 Chevy. Today we're going to get all of our frame and suspension parts sent out to Prime Powdercoating, where they're going to put us an awesome finish on all of these parts. We're also going to get our cab rolled into the paint booth, where we're going to work on the bottom side, take care of any imperfections, talk about paint gun setup, a little bit about tapes, and we're also going to get our bed rolled in there and see if we can't get some color on that too. All right, so we got the floor worked in urethane primer. We're just about ready to go. We've got everything sanded out. We do have a few little things that we do need to take care of. I did find a couple of little pinholes, so each one of these pieces of tape represents a little pinhole or imperfection in here somewhere, which we can do a little putty work and take care of that with our Evercoat putty. No big deal at all. We can knock that out pretty quick. But another thing, we're going to seam seal the braces. So as opposed to welding all of these all the way down both sides and doing all that metal work, this being under the truck and a lot of this being hid, we can get away with using a little bit of seam sealer. Like on your old hot rods, if you're not welding up all those seams, a lot of them from the factory had seam sealer in it. So we're laying down our tape lines where our seam sealer is going to go. And this is going to help us to get a nice sharp edge, and we can smooth this out against the tape, not make any mess onto the primer. I'll show you how we're going to do that, but we're using Indasa tape for that. This is a really cool tape they have. Makes a really sharp edge, so when we pull this away, it should be a nice crisp edge all the way down through there. So we've got to mask a few of these braces through here, a couple of seams, like there's another small one there. We're going to mask those up. So I'll show you how we seam seal all that. And we'll putty those spots, and we should be able to get ready to mask it up and start laying down some color. Hopefully roll this out, move the bed in. Let's talk tape for a second. So if you follow along with us here, we use Indasa products. So we use all the Indasa tapes, and typically when we're doing paint work, masking, getting the car ready to paint or prime, we're using the green Indasa tape. But this is actually a different tape that they have. It's called the Precision Masking Tape. This is one of the orange rolls. So this is a much thinner masking tape. I don't know if you can see this on here, but it's super thin, made from rice paper. Really good UV protection. I'll tell you how good it is. This can be, you can tape something, have this in the sun for 60 days and still pull off clean tape and not leave any residue behind. That's pretty awesome. But what is the great thing about this tape, and why we're even using it right here on this seam sealer, is we still want the seam sealer to look as good as we can possibly make it look. We don't want it just slapped on there or just a bead ran out of the gun. We want a really clean, flat seam seal with good sharp edges on it. And that is one of the main reasons I use the precision tape. So if you're doing paint work, custom paint work, definitely where you're doing, flames or graphics or anything like that, this tape leaves such a crisp, sharp edge. It's amazing. So if you do any custom paint work or you need a good sharp edge, sometimes if you're using any other tapes and you go to pull it off, you get kind of that little fuzziness right on the edge of your paint. Not a big deal. You don't get that with this. So that's why we're using it on the seam sealer edges right here. All right, so we're gonna get the bottom of this blown off. We're gonna finish masking up everywhere we're gonna seam seal. We can putty our few little spots we have and then just go over this thing with a fine tooth comb and make sure we've got it how we want it to be. This being in a urethane primer, that's good. We can top coat this. We'll lay down a sealer, base coat, clear coat, and this is gonna be color matched to the cab, which the color on here is carbon flash. It's a black metallic, looks really nice, and then that should offset with the color you're gonna have to wait to see on the frame. So the first thing we're gonna do is prep our small areas that are gonna get putty. We'll be using Evercoat's Optics Putty. So I'm going off their data sheet, which calls for 80 to 180 grit sanding before applying that. So we're just gonna make sure we scuff those up. Next, we've got a couple of spots that we need to wipe that you can see the spreader's a little too big for. So here's a neat little trick. You can just kind of scribe the spreader where you want it to be, fold it over. It'll break right in two and you'll have yourself a nice small spreader. We're going to be using Evercoat Z-Grip Glaze Optics Putty. This is a really awesome putty that can be applied over steel, properly prepped painted surfaces, aluminum. Check out their TDS sheet because it'll show you everything you can apply it over. And then with a little bit of activator, we're going to pallet that out. And what this is doing as opposed to stirring it is we're pushing out the air bubbles. That way when we go to wipe it on, we're getting a really smooth finish, no air bubbles, and it's going to limit some of those pinholes. So while we wait on that before we can sand it, Ben's got our bed ready to go into Evercoat's Eurofill Urethane Primer. This will be our last step of primer before we're ready to go into paint. So you can see after a little bit of blocking, everything's looking pretty good, but we've got a little bit of a low spot. You can see the color difference right there. That's showing me without even touching it that that is still a low spot. Everything else is looking pretty good. We're blocking this with 80 grit with an aluminum block, so there's no give to that at all. So we're gonna mix up a little more of that Optics putty, spread that on in that low spot. Now the cool thing about this putty is when we spread it on, it's gonna spread on pink. But as it dries, it's gonna start to turn blue, and that lets you know when it's ready to sand. I really love that putty, so easy to sand. So right here what we had, just a couple of little spots in it, so that's just a real tight skim coat on there. And then the low spot we had for that second wipe is just a spot I missed it. Happens. But anyway, we've got that taken care of now. We've got all of our little pinholes or scratches that I found in it are taken care of. So what we're working on now is in front of the fender section. Let me show you that. So moving to the front of the truck, this is right behind the front fenders. There's this little channel in here. Now when we restored the truck before, we just blacked this out. There is, I can see where we had patched it before. There's a little weld seam there. You can barely see it, but if you really get in there looking around, you can see that it wasn't finished out like the rest of the truck. So we're gonna finish that out like the rest of it, where everything is really nice. So I've got the weld seam knocked down now. We're ready for some putty there. Everything else is pretty good. It was just that one little weld seam I saw, and there's not one on the other one, so I'm guessing that we didn't patch that. So let's get this puttied. Same process as we just did. And then we should be able to squirt a little urethane primer on it, that Eurofill Evercoat surfacer. Let that sit for a bit. We can sand that, and then we should be ready for seam sealer. That's why you always clean your panel before applying a product. Okay, so we've got all our putty sanded, ready for primer. So we're gonna use the same thing we used on the bed, which is the Evercoat Eurofill. So if you're new to this type of work, something I'll definitely throw in there is using all the same products through these steps make life a lot easier. So like we're using the Evercoat, we're using their fillers, their putties, their primers, their polyesters all the way through. The great thing about that is following the technical data sheets. I live by those things. And if you're using the same product all the way through, you know they're all going to be compatible with each other, most of them, and all the preparations for each step are typically going to be the same. For instance, this putty, they recommend finishing it out in 180 or 220 or up to 320 if you prefer to do that. So then if you hop over to the Eurofill primer that we're about to lay on top of this putty, basically the same thing. 180 to 220, feather edge it out with 320. So we know all those steps are going to be the same. So like I said, if you're starting off in this, one thing I can say is print off those data sheets, live by them, because they're telling you exactly what you need to do. So now that we've got all this prepared and ready, so one thing you have to keep in mind, this is the bottom of the truck. There's going to be mirrors under it where, you know, people will be able to see the underside and judges will get under and check it out. But this not being the exterior of the truck, it does not necessarily have to be perfect, okay? So what we've done is anything that would stand out to the eye if you're staring at it, we're taking care of that. The difference in this compared to the exterior of the truck is there's no real reflection under here. And what I mean by that is when we do the exterior of the trucks, all these 8-foot LED lights we have running in the shop, we basically are using those as straight edges. So if we're blocking the exterior of the truck and we take something like our quick check where we can simulate a clear coat, we spray it down, we use those lights and we walk the light up and down the panel, and if that light moves at all, it means we've got a dent, wiggle, or a roll in the panel and we need to do a little more blocking. Well, when we're under the bottom of the truck, there is no real reflection like that. So it's just basically what your eye sees. So when you look under here, it's gonna look like $1,000,000. So we've taken out just anything that would really stand out to the eye. We've not went crazy, we've not went overboard. There's not a tremendous amount of work in this like there would be on the exterior, and it's gonna look really nice. So you have to kind of keep in mind, like, how far do you take it? Because you could spend 1,000 hours under here if you wanted to, but it doesn't make sense. And so we've got it where it's gonna look really good when it's under the truck. Now the next thing we're gonna do is mask it up. Since we're already in urethane all over this thing and we only have a few spots we want to prime, we don't want that urethane overspray to get all over everything where we're having to resand the whole bottom of the truck again. Another thing that would be a waste of time. So we're going to mask each individual spot that we're going to prime. We only have a few. And what I like to do with that, and I think is pretty good practice for when you're doing this, I know how far from doing this through the years, how far I'm going to take the primer out from the repaired area. So if you're going to mask it, we've got our Indasa tape here, really good stuff. If you go and you just lay tape down and you prime up to that, then you've got a hard edge because you're priming right up to your tape line. So when you unmask that, you've got to feather out that hard edge. Takes a little longer, and honestly, it's kind of hard to get rid of. So one thing that I like to do when I mask any of these spots where we're going to spot prime is what's called a back mask. So we're going to lay the tape down, stick down the bottom side of it, and we're going to roll the top down. What that does, it gives us a soft edge. So if any primer was to overspray down to the tape, it's going to be a really soft edge, super easy to sand away. And another thing when you're doing this is don't prime right up to your tape. Step it out just a little further. Gives you plenty of room for your primer. And that's pretty much it. Funny story now to think back on it, this masking machine, man, I think I got it when 16 or 17, maybe something like that. So, 20, 23, 24 years ago or something like that. But anyway, so I was trying to paint cars and do all this stuff. I remember I really wanted a masking machine. And I was, what I was painting, I was just razor blading the paper off, sticking the tape to it, pain in the butt. Then I came across these masking machines and I was like, man, I've got to have one of those. So a buddy of mine was asking me to paint, it's like the bumper cover on his car or something like that. And I'm sitting there and we're kind of figuring out like what it's going to cost to do it or whatever. And he goes, hey man, I'll tell you what, I'll go buy you that masking machine if you'll spray this bumper. I was like, oh hell yeah, good deal. So anyway, I spray this bumper. He goes and buys the masking machine. Still use it every day. Pretty good investment now to look back on it. I don't remember what they cost back then, but I just remember not wanting to spend the money on it. So now that we've got everything masked, we're ready to mix up our Evercoat Eurofill Urethane Primer. This mixes 4-to-1 with activator, and we're using our Indasa mixing system. Now these work well with our Sada guns. We're going to lay down some primer. All right, you're welcome for not making you watch me mask, because I was just as bored masking as you would have been watching it. But we're here, we're ready now. Ready to lay down some products. So the first thing we're going to lay down is an epoxy sealer from Glasurit. We've got a couple of spots here and there where we've broken through the primer. It's going to make it super easy to get good coverage when we get to our base coat. Plus, being an epoxy sealer, very good adhesion. So really good ground coat to start with. So I'm going to get suited up. We're going to tack this off and hopefully start squirting. Well, I messed up. Go figure. So all my Sada guns have disposable cups. I think I showed one of those Indasa cups a little earlier. So I've got a whole bag of lids out there for the disposable cups. So I'm not thinking anything about it, like, must have a bunch of cups. Nope. I got a bunch of lids. I don't have a bunch of cups. I don't have any cups. So, gonna have to do something that I haven't done in a while, and that's use a different gun. Now, a lot of times that's not comfortable because you get kind of in a groove with a certain thing that you're using, and I've been using those Sadas for quite a few years now. But I'll have to say too, it's pretty good practice to go back, use a different gun. So we're gonna set up a little test spot here, check this gun, make sure everything's good, that we've got a good spray pattern and all that, and hopefully I remember how to use it. All right, maybe you can hear me with everything running. It's super loud in here. All right, so it's really important setting up your spray gun before you spray. You want to know what you're dealing with before you go to lay it down on a panel that you've spent hours and hours on to get to this point. So you don't want to ruin it right here. Now, why this is really important is, like today, for instance, we've ran into a situation where we're not about to use the paint guns that we're used to using every day. We're going back to one I was using 10, 15 years ago. So I don't remember how it sprayed. I know I got a good result out of it, but I'm so used to something else now. So it's very important to always set up your spray gun. So we're spraying sealer right now, then we're gonna follow that with base coat. But when I do that, I'm normally spraying with a 1.4 nozzle tip. Now that is the size needle that is running through the gun. Now, I don't know if you can see that, but right there, that's the needle. So when we pull the trigger, that needle pulls back, all of our fluid comes out when the air pressure goes through the gun. So with this gun, this is an HVLP gun, and that means high volume, low pressure. So at the inlet of the gun, this one's around 17 to 18 PSI. That's where it likes it. So we don't have a lot of air pressure coming in, but we are getting a lot of volume coming out of the gun. So that's something to definitely note. One thing, and this goes back, take care of your guns. And this is a good example of that. I took very good care of this gun, and which is why we're able to use it today. There's been a lot of stuff sprayed through this one. So here's what I'm looking for when I'm spraying. I have a base adjustment that I always go with. It pretty much tells me that no matter what gun I have in my hand, I kind of know the result I'm going to get, if that makes sense. And that comes from the setup. So one of the most important things is the needle adjustment right here, and that's your fluid adjustment. That's how much fluid you're allowing to come through the gun, and that is this knob right here that is on the back side of the needle. So when I go to set this up without any fluid in the gun, I always hold the trigger all the way down, and I'll turn the knob until I feel pressure on the trigger. That tells me right there, my fluid, I know pretty well where it's going to be with any gun. Then we've got our fan adjustment. Now that's the knob right above your needle fluid adjustment. And I'll show you right now, if we cut this all the way in, you see what we get. We get a really tight bullet. Now that's great for if we're trying to get in little areas that we can't get to, or maybe you've got a brace or a little bracket, a pinch weld area that you've really got to get some paint in there. That's really great for that. We cut the air pressure down a little more, and then we've got a bullet. So now that we've got the needle set, I'll back that fan all the way out. I normally cut it back in about a half to a full turn. I'll show you what we get with that. And we've also got 18 PSI at the gauge. Pretty much a perfect pattern. See that old-timey cigar shape? That's what we're looking for. That's a really good pattern. Looking for about a 10-inch pattern. That's going to be really good for an overlap to get good coverage to get across the panel. So 18 at this inlet. Fluid is adjusted in to where we've got pressure on the trigger. And we're about a half turn or so in on our fan adjustment up here. Basic setup, works pretty much every time. Coats of sealer already laid down. We're going to go mix up some base, see if we can get that on. All right, so we got one coat of base down, ready for the second coat. We're gonna do 3 coats. Everything's covered really nice. This black has some metallic in it, so we gotta make sure it's all even. So first coat, we got good coverage. That 55 line of glasurit, it's a polyester base, covers great. So a couple more coats, should be ready for some clear. Coats base laid down, everything looks really good so far. We've got some clear mixed up in the gun, and let's make it wet. Got the bed moved in the booth, about ready to start shooting. Sorry if there's lines running across the screen. I've changed the frame rate. Maybe it'll work out. These LED lights, they play with the camera a lot, but maybe it's okay. We've got the bed in here. We're ready to lay down some sealer. I've got it mixed up in the gun. We're all suited up. I've kind of dreaded the bed a little bit because we were going to put it on the rotisserie, and it was going to be quite a task to do that, which obviously would have made it easier to shoot, to be able to flip it around. Now I'm going to have to crawl under it. But with how we built the roll pan, in order to get the rotisserie where we need it to be to bolt it up, we were going to have to build quite the contraption, and since we're under a deadline, in order to build that, the amount of time it would take just to get it on the rotisserie, my butt's going to crawl under this thing and see if we can get everything slicked out. So I think the only hard part is going to be where we're at the end of the bed toward the tailgate, getting inside that roll pan, inside where the body mounts are, and some of that bracing is going to be hard to get. Spraying upside down is not too big of a deal, but we need to make sure we get that really good. We've also got the inner fenders in here, and we've got the front valance, and Ben's got a lot of the other parts ready to paint. So we're going to see if we can knock these out today, move in the next round of parts, and just keep going. And next week the guys hopefully can get a lot of this stuff put together. But I've got it tacked off, it's degreased, it's clean, it's good to go. So let's start laying it down. Sealer time! sealer laid down, everything laid down nice, looks really good. We used an epoxy sealer inside because we had the bare metal railing. We didn't want to build that up and thicken it with any primer, and it was finished out nice and metal. So just an epoxy sealer over that is all we need. That way we'll get good adhesion there. All of our other parts have sealer on them. So I've got base coat mixed up in the gun. We're spraying carbon flash. It's a black metallic, looks really nice. We're gonna get a few coats laid down. I've got the new Sada mini jet gun out, so hopefully we can get into some of those tight corners, but let's get a few coats down, see how she looks. All right, so I'm gonna start off with the big gun, get everything covered, and then we're gonna come back in with that mini jet if there's anything we missed in those tight corners. Well, unfortunately, we've ran out of time, and also the final videos of the cab and the bed, the finished results, the files were corrupted on the camera. So here's a few pictures just so you can get an idea of what it turned out like. Everything turned out great. Next week when we come back, we're going to work on the wood that's going in the bed, do some cool stain tricks, clear that, show you some cool stuff on that as well. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment Vim Tools below to enter the tool giveaway. Get yourself some free tools. Also, our website, the link's in the description below. Go grab some merch. Appreciate you guys watching. We appreciate all the support and all the great comments. We'll see you next time.